Yo, what's poppin', man? It's your boy EI the King, and this is the Incarceration Podcast, where I talk about prison, pre, post, and present. And I specifically explain how everything that I faced throughout my incarceration has forever transformed my life. This is the incarceration. So listen, man, I'm gonna go ahead and get to it. Look, my biggest fear, hands down, is going back to prison. And for people who know me and they know my story, they know that throughout my incarceration, like my life was completely changed. And that's ultimately through faith in Jesus Christ. I wasn't that same broken, hurt, violent kid just chasing the street dream, selling drugs, fighting, and robbing. Throughout my incarceration, I found purpose. I found my identity as a man, and ultimately that's through faith in Jesus. So now, throughout my transition home back in society, I'm not in the streets no more. I'm not trying to chase a fantasy of seeking fulfillment through street prestige. So people be like, bro, like, why would you even worry or think that it's a possibility that you could go back to prison? And I think that simply put, man, the reality is, I have been incarcerated the majority of my life. I've spent over 12 years in adult prison, and that's not even counting the juvenile programs and the juvenile detention stints. So from a young age, man, my mind, my psyche, I became institutionalized to where, as I share all the time, that my time in society, my time in the free world became vacations for me. And my home became prison or juvenile programs. That's what I was used to. That was my normal. So now being home, back in society, free for the longest I've ever been as an adult, I still feel at times like there's a dark cloud, like just hanging over me, in which I am absolutely terrified that there is some slight possibility that somehow I could end back up in prison. And I mean, that's been my track record. I mean, time and time again, I would get out of prison, and I would say that I was going to do the right thing, and I was gonna stay out of I was gonna stay out of the streets. I was gonna stay out of trouble. But time and time again, I continued to not only prove other people wrong, who I was telling that to, but I was also like proving myself wrong because I continued to go back to jail, to go back to prison. And I think like psychologically, that was the thing that I would always wrestle with internally. Like, dang, bro, like I can't even trust myself with freedom or with right decision making. So even though now, man, praise be to God, my decision making has been consistent in doing the right thing, I still at times, man, am terrified that there is a possibility that I could somehow end back up in prison. And man, I think just one of the things that sticks out to me that shows how scared I am of going back to prison is the fact that I was dreaming the other day. And in my dream, it wasn't even really so much a nightmare. It was just in my sleep, I was dreaming that I was back incarcerated. And it was just one of those really vivid dreams to where like it was just a normal day in prison. I don't know if I'm going to child or I'm going to rec or I'm at my bunk in my cell or doing something, but in my dream, I was obviously in prison and it was very vivid. And when I woke up, I was sick to my stomach and I was just thoroughly disgusted. I remember just waking up thinking, God, that it was a dream. And the scariest call that I've had since I've been home is the fact that, I almost did go back to prison. For those who know my story, I came home on CRD. And in the state of Florida, CRD is a type of parole. In the state of Florida, they don't have in the criminal justice system to where you can parole out of prison anymore. But with your 85%, prison time, if you get all your good time, your gang time, you're released, but you're released on CRD, which is conditional release. It's pretty much like probation, but it's parole because if you violate, you get sent back to prison. So for me, I had a 10 o'clock curfew. I couldn't go to any facilities like any bars or clubs that only serve alcohol. I couldn't leave the county without permission. So, technology is new to me. And I immediately became an iPhone junkie. But at first, I really didn't know how to work my iPhone like entirely. So like whenever I was setting up my iPhone at first, I guess like It was asking me questions about like, my sleep pattern or whatever. And I guess somehow like I put my phone on sleep mode to where at like 10 or 11 o'clock at night, my phone would automatically like go on silent, and to where I wouldn't receive any calls. I mean, obviously you receive calls, but you're not notified. Your phone's not ringing, your text ain't dinging. So I have to have my phone on and ringing just in case my parole officer, he does curfew checks. But I wasn't aware that my phone was on sleep mode. I'm kind of green and ignorant when it comes to technology. And I think it was maybe only like my first week out. And I'm sleeping, and apparently my parole officer is blowing up my phone, outside of my apartment in his patrol car, trying to do a curfew check. And as he's calling, it's going straight, to my phone, but it's like on D&D, do not disturb, and I'm not hearing it ring. And for some reason, I don't know if I was sleeping, I woke up and went to the bathroom or something. I look at my phone and I see I had like 10 missed calls, and it's my parole officer. So immediately I'm calling. It's probably like maybe 5 o'clock in the morning. So he even texted me and said like, Mr. Testa, I'm outside. Where are you? So I'm blowing him up. He's not picking up the phone. I'm calling him back. I'm terrified because I know that if he does a curfew check and if I'm not home, I can get sent back to prison. So I'm absolutely terrified. I'm immediately videotaping myself in the kitchen, like showing the clock in the background, telling my parole officer, like, yo, I show him my apartment door. I get my MacBook. I show him the date and the time. Like, yo, I'm home. I was sleeping. My phone was on Do Not Disturb. I sent him the video. I'm still calling him. He's not picking up. So I'm up terrified. I had to wait till 8 o'clock in the morning to where he's finally in office. I call him, and he was pissed. Mr. Testa, that's a curfew violation. I can send you back to prison. And I'm just swearing to this man up and down that, yo, I was sleeping, man. I was asleep. And praise be to God, man, by the favor and grace of God, I didn't get violated. But he hung that over my head as a threat to turn in that curfew violation, and which could send me back to prison. But he was lenient on me because I just came home and because I explained to him how my phone was on D&D. I didn't even know it was on. So the whole point that I'm getting at, it was situations, and it is situations like that, especially still being in the system, even though I'm free, I'm living a life, that's crime free, I'm doing the right thing. It's still a cloud hanging over me that, yo, especially being on parole, like CRD, like there's a possibility, and I don't believe for me, but I mean, there is a possibility and a chance that you could violate and get sent back to prison. And all that time you did on parole don't even count. You got to do all that parole time, all that gang time back in the chain gang, back in prison. And I remember another time which I was terrified. It's probably the most terrifying time. I do Uber, as a side hustle. And during this time, I have a 10 o'clock curfew, but I was given permission by my parole officer to be out past 10 for business. So I'm driving. I got an Uber rider in the back, and it's probably not even 10 o'clock yet. It's like 9:50, and they have a whole bunch of police on the side of the road. And I don't even think they were marked cars. I think they were like unmarked. So for whatever reason, like police gets behind me, he's trailing me. He runs my tags. I'm sure he's seen my criminal record, and he pulls me over immediately. So they pull up, and I could tell just because right when they pulled me over, had the lights on, then immediately another cop car came up, and then another one. So they had 3 cop cars behind me. I got the Uber rider in the back. She's terrified. And I already know they're going to pull me out the vehicle and want to search me just because of my record. So right whenever they pull up to the window, I have my window down. They're like, Mr. Testa, man, you mind stepping out of the vehicle for a second? So I step out of the vehicle. And right as he's walking me to the back, he's like, yo, walk back here with me. So right as he's walking me back to my trunk, immediately he grabs my wrist. He turns me around and puts me in handcuffs. He says, Mr. Testa, man, you're on parole. Why are you out past your curfew? This is a violation. So my heart sank. I'm freaking terrified, because the first thought in my mind is like, yo, I'm going back to prison. I'm going back to prison for nothing. Even though I was given, that's one thing that's still scary about the system. It's like, yo, you're given like verbal permission from the parole officer. Like I can be out past curfew for business. But, as I'm explaining that to the police, they're like, all right, like we hear you saying that, but do you have anything written? Do you have like a written pass or something written with him signing it, or from like the state of Florida saying you're allowed to be out past your curfew? I'm like, nah, man, he told me, so he's like, all right, well, what's your parole officer? I give him my phone, and he's trying to call the parole officer, and they're getting his number, and I know it's like 10 o'clock. He's not going to pick up the phone. It's his work phone. So, man, I'm just terrified thinking that yo, this could send me back to prison. And you always hear horror stories about that in prison, about people getting out doing the right thing, but because they're on probation or they're on CRD parole, like somehow they can get still hung up in the system, violate, and get sent back for nothing. And that's been my life, man, a revolving door of just incarceration after incarceration after incarceration. So, man, I'm terrified. I'm praying, just asking God, please, for his favor, his grace, his mercy. So, as the police and the squad car are calling like my parole officer, they got these two other cop cars standing in front of me, and they're like gang officers, gang task force undercover. So I had the opportunity to share with them my testimony about how the Lord transformed my life in the chain gang in prison, and how now I'm living, a law-abiding civilian lifestyle to where I'm in full-time ministry. I'm intentionally in the streets with the gospel and just doing right by my family, by my kids. And I was able to share my testimony and share the gospel with them. And that was an awesome and beautiful opportunity. So even though my parole officer didn't pick up the phone, they called his supervisor at shift. And man, by the favor of God, they let me go. And I wasn't violated. I just had to call the following morning, check in, make sure my parole officer was, cool with me being out working, which I was. But just a simple fact, man, that I was working. I was pulled over because it was close to my curfew, like past my curfew as they pulled me. And, that situation could have sent me back to prison. So I think for anybody that's done any amount of prison time, especially a lot of prison time, and, they break away from a lifestyle of crime and finally doing the right thing, that their biggest fear, I know speaking for myself, my biggest fear hands down is, going back to prison. Just because you've done that for so long and you're just so disgusted and over that part of your life. Though I wouldn't take back 1 day, 1 hour, 1 minute. I thank God because he used all of it to transform my life. By no means do I want to go back, unless it's to do ministry, to preach the gospel, to go visit a homie. Man, I do not, by no means ever, and it's hands down my biggest fear in life is going back to prison. And it's funny too because the other day I got in an argument with a friend of mine, and she was just being petty, and I was just ignoring her, and I didn't realize it in the moment, but I guess I kind of like shut off or just shut her out, and just the whole situation. And she began to throw that in my face. She's like, "You always do that. You always just turn off, your emotions. You just, shut down, or you just block everything out, and it's just like irrelevant to you." And I know God's obviously, transformed my life and given me a new mindset, and to where I want to do the right thing in relationships and just in, every circumstance. But, whenever she said that, later on, I began to look back and reflect, on myself and how I can improve and grow and mature as a man. And I'm like, dang, why do I do that? That defense mechanism of just blocking her out or people out whenever things can get difficult, and just like shut down and just like write it off. And I began to look back and realize that, and she said specifically, you can be so numb. And I remember that statement stuck with me, and I thought about it, and I'm like, dang, like, and I think I began to realize that, I can be numb and kind of cold. And I began to look back and see and think about the reasons why, I was. And, it immediately led me, to look back at my, my prison bids. And I began to think and reflect. It's like you kind of have to learn, and you begin to like adopt that personality trait of like shutting things off and becoming numb and becoming cold for lots of reasons. And the illustration I always share with people, and I always look back, and I began to realize throughout years in prison, as you can see, like over here and behind me, like my most prized possessions in prison were my pictures. And especially like the pictures I would take with my kids at visitation. I was only able to see my kids, once a year in prison, sometimes not even that. Sometimes I went years without seeing them. And visitation, it would be beautiful seeing my kids, and it's sad to watch your kids grow up in prison. Every year, or sometimes skipping years, you see them, they get bigger and bigger and bigger. And, it's such a beautiful moment going to visitation and being able to reconnect with my children and spend time with my kids. But then whenever you leave, man, it's like a freaking slap in the face. Just being thoroughly disgusted with myself. Thanking God for the opportunity to love on my kids and to experience, a physical and personal encounter with them and our relationship. But then walking back to your dorm, going back to your cell, laying back on your rack, and just like reflecting and realizing like everything that I'm missing in their lives, not being there for them. Or just thinking about the distance that you could even tell in the visitation park with the kids. And it's because, like, yo, I'm a stranger to them. And seeing the pain on their eyes, and the look on their face whenever, they have to leave. And, I can't go with them. And when my kids are walking out the door, my son, especially when he's real little, he used to always look back and look at me, right before he would walk out the door. Man, that would crush me. So the reason why I say that is because, like, visitation was beautiful. It was awesome to see my kids, but it hurt tremendously, at the same time, especially whenever they would leave. And I would have to go back to my reality, and that was prison. And a lot of times, man, like days I would get visitation, which would only be like once a year, when it would be with my kids, I would just go back to my rack, bro, and I just lay back. I put the covers over my face, and I just put music in. I try to go to sleep, or bro, I cry, and and you begin like, okay, you have to face it in that moment because it's like right in your face. My kids are there. But throughout the majority of my time incarcerated, like, yeah, I love my pictures. I love my kids. I look at them all the time. But you begin to learn that, like, yo, you can't look at your pictures all the time. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, there's pictures of my kids and me in my Bible. I see it every day. But there's a difference between glancing at a picture and then, like, just going through your photo album and, like, reminiscing and just, like, really looking at all the pictures and reflecting and thinking about your kids. Because if you do that too much, it's going to destroy you. It's going to destroy you. It's going to make you constantly think of everything you're missing. So the reason why I say all that is because, like, even with, the pictures of my kids, like, yeah, I look at them, but you can't look at them like that all the time. I write my kids monthly. I call them weekly. But you can't spend every day, every minute thinking about your kids or your family or even the streets. You got to be focused on prison, on my world, what's going on around me, just so the clock will keep moving, because you'll drive yourself crazy thinking about society, thinking about the outside world. So it's things like that you I think I began to learn, and people who are incarcerated for a long period of time, we learn to kind of like turn off, our emotions and detach and maybe get cold. And especially when it comes to what you see in the chain gang and the violence and the chaos. I mean, it's an everyday, regular situation to where people are getting robbed, people are getting stabbed, people, can get killed, just hostility, people being taken advantage of, people being like sexually abused, the drug addiction, all the fights, gang wars, and like I say all the time, like, it's not like absolutely insane every single day, but nah, there's something always going down every day, and it's definitely hostile, it's chaotic, it's violent, and the atmosphere is definitely not friendly. So when you see so much stuff on a regular basis, day in and day out, year after year, year after year, you get used to it. It's different. Like, of course, when you first go to prison, you see someone get stabbed for the first time. It's like, dang, like, that's crazy. Or like, somebody and they got killed. Or somebody and they died, from smoking dope. And it's like, dang. But as time progresses and you continue to do years in prison, that's the norm. And you get used to it. And a story that always comes to my mind is there was this dude, and I was in an open bay dorm. He slept right next to me. And, as I say all the time in the chain gang, man, everybody knows everything. Just because, like, yo, especially if you're open bay or just even if you're in a 2-man cell, like, yo, people watch each other. People are very observant, and don't get me wrong, you want to stay in your own lane. You don't want to be in other people's business, but means of survival or just being aware of your surroundings. And even when it comes to like criminal cases, You know what I mean? The people like are known snitches in their city. You know what I mean? Like that's gonna be put on blast on the compound. Especially people who have sexual charges. You know what I mean? Like child molesters in the chain gang. You know they're known as chomos, sexual predators. Especially people with those type of crimes. A lot of times, man, before they even get on the bus. You know what I mean? Like the gangs got like all their names written down. You know what I mean? And what bunk they're going to. You know what I mean? Like they're pulling up in extortion time. So everybody knows, everybody's business, especially when it comes to like red flags like that. So there was a dude who slept right next to me in Open Bay. And he was a good dude, man. He was about my age, young kid. And but I knew he had a sex crime, and obviously, wanting to show him as well as everybody the love of Christ. I didn't, condemn him or treat him differently. Of course, I got kids. It hits home to me. But obviously in prison, who you associate with, can kind of, give people a certain perception of you. So yeah, we talked, we built, especially because he slept next to me, but he was Jehovah's Witness. So a lot of times I share the gospel with him, and we would have spiritual debates, and I would definitely, defend the deity of Jesus and try to explain to him in scripture that Jesus is God and things like that. But there was a lot of gang members in my dorm, and there was a specific set, and I was really close with the head of the set, and he was in the dorm with me. And there was another member of the same set, and he was, he kept violating us, doing certain things that, they weren't approving of. So they gave dude the option, like, yo, you got to get from around here. Like, you got to get off the pound. They were telling that to, their brother. And I kind of knew about the situation just because, like the head was my homie. So I knew that, this dude who they were Xing out, they weren't really Xing him out of the game, but he had to get off the pound. They were making him leave. I knew that he was going to probably crash out because a lot of the gang members or anybody who has, a lot of pride in prison, if they want to get off the compound, if they want to get sent to another prison, people can do that when they check in. Like they go to the police like, yo, I'm trying to check in, like PC, protective custody. All right, but that's a huge stain on your face. You know what I mean? Because prison, even though like in the state of Florida, there's a million prisons. I don't know how many there are. Probably like maybe like 60 or something like that. But even though you can do years and years and years, or you can do a life sentence and not go to all the prisons, but still people are always getting transferred. So your reputation is your everything, just like in the streets, like your face is your everything, your word is your everything. So you want to keep a clean face in the chain gang. So what a lot of guys do, who want to keep a clean face and, they're just, proud that they refuse to check in, to get off the pound. Some people do, a lot of people do. For whatever reason, whether they're really in some conflict and they're scared and they're trying to get off the pound, or sometimes people just go and they lie. You know what I mean? They got to snitch when they go to confinement, and they got to like lie on somebody and say like this person or this gang, they're after me or whatever. Like people have to do that to get transferred, under like protective custody. So that's why a lot of people don't go that route, which unless, they're on that type of time, but a lot of, guys who are trying to keep a, good face and got a lot of pride and refuse to like check in, they'll crash out to get off the pound. Either they'll like stab somebody in a really crazy way, like, to where like, administration is not, don't get me wrong, sometimes there's a lot of stabbings and they'll keep you on the same pound. They'll put you in the same dorm. After you do your confinement time, they'll put you in the same dorm and the guy you stabbed. They'll put both y'all in the same exact dorm. It all depends what prison you at, what administration's working. So it's never like a formula that they follow, man. Sometimes they don't even care. You can stab this dude and y'all both go to confinement for however many days, 60, 90 days, 120, whatever. And whenever y'all both get out confinement, they put y'all right back in the same dorm and they want y'all to go at it again till one of y'all kill each other. The administration won't even care. But sometimes, somebody will stab somebody and they'll transfer them out of there. Emergency transfer, or they're like, all right, we don't want you on our pound. You're causing too much chaos, so they transfer you. So this guy, who's in the set, and the head of the gang is telling him like, yo, you got to get off the pound. So he's not going to check in. So he decides that he's going to crash out, which most people knew, like he ain't going to check in. He's going to crash out somehow. He's going to crash somebody. So he used to always kind of bully the guy who slept next to me. obviously, because that's a huge thing in prison. Anybody with anyone who is a sex offender has sex cases. Like, you got a target on your head. They're prey. They're shark bait, either being extorted or just taken advantage of sexually, slapped around. You know what I mean? Getting their stuff taken, robbed. You know what I mean? They'll be humiliating those guys, and just torturing some people. Man, that's how they do time. They just torture chomos. That's just what they do. You know what I mean? They get off on it. You know what I mean? They just be torturing those guys. So that's just how they do time. So the gangbanger who had to get off the pound, like, he used to always kind of like shoot at the guy who slept next to me. But he was a big dude, even though he had a sex case. Like, he was pretty big. So it's probably like 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning. Keep in mind, this is open bay. So like in open bay, they probably got maybe like 60, maybe not 60, maybe like 40, 45 single bunks, maybe more than, I forget, single racks, next to each other. And you got maybe like 2-3 feet from the rack next to you. So laying on my bunk, I can lay over and hit the bunk next to me. You know what I mean? The guy sleeping next to me, or this side, or even the guy who's like at my head, I can just tap him right here from behind me because they're sleeping like this. So I'm sleeping on my bunk 2-3 o'clock in the morning, and all of a sudden I just hear screaming, and it's right next to me. So I jump up and I look over, and it's this dude, who gangbangs, who got to get off the pound. He's just standing over top of the dude sleeping next to me, the sex offender. Bam, 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 hitting him while he was sleeping, so obviously he woke up. So he just took off him when he's sleeping. Bam, he drops to the ground. He's just standing over top of him and just pummeling this guy and just hitting him time and time. I'm talking about nonstop, no exaggeration. This dude's probably on top of him for a good maybe 3 to 4 minutes, just nonstop teeing off on this dude. And the dude who's getting hit, he's just curled up and he's screaming. And the guy's just taking off on him as hard as he can, just teeing away, until finally the police and the bubble notice. They come running out, and he still won't stop. They're trying to rip him off. He's still hitting them. They spray him, and they take him to confinement. So me, personally, I'm not, especially in the chain gang, bro, like, you can't get in other people's business, especially when it comes to conflict, when it comes to, situations like that, just because all of a sudden you're going to adopt or you're going to enter into a conflict that's not even your own. So especially me being like, a follower of Jesus, I want to do the right thing. And even though this guy, has a sex charge and is labeled a chomo on the chain gang, in which a lot of people say, man, he deserves that, part of me kind of wanted to like pull this guy back from it, because he's devouring this dude. It's like he just ain't hit him a couple. He's breaking this dude's face in. And, it's terrible to see, so part of you wants to like pull him back, like, dang, bro, you know what I mean? Like he had enough, you know what I mean? Because he's just trying to get off the pound, but you can't. But anyways, at this point in time, I was already in prison for a long time. So that's just like an internal thought process you have in the moment. But really, it's like, man, that's just like, that's whatever. That's not how I'm feeling inside. It's like, dang, that's messed up. But seeing that time and time again, that's your norm. And the whole reason why I even brought that story up is because, as my friend said, like, yo, you can be cold. And I'm like, dang, I'm thinking to myself, like, later on, like, I don't want to be cold. You know what I mean? I want to be like, I want to be able to sympathize with people, and I feel like I do and I can, in a lot of things. But I do think at times I get to shut off. And like I was saying, as I began to reflect throughout my experience incarcerated, I think it was situations like that. You know what I mean? That and that's one of a million stories, that you see first-handedly, that just make you numb, and it's like, of course you kind of feel bad, but it's like, man, you see it all the time, you get used to it, and it kind of can take away the sensitivity of emotion, or sympathy that you should have. And the whole reason why I got to that is I just think that, man, that's just a reality of being incarcerated for a long time. So, man, listen, bro, this is your boy E.I. the King, and this is the Incarceration podcast, where I talk about prison, pre, post, and present, and how I share how everything that I experienced throughout my incarceration has forever transformed my life. This is the Incarceration. Now, listen, if you're listening to this, on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, man, go ahead and go to my YouTube channel at the Incarceration Podcast. Subscribe. If you're watching this from YouTube, go ahead and rate this, whatever you feel like it is, 1 to 10. If you think it's fire, drop a fire emoji. You think it's trash, go ahead, drop a trash bin. If you have any different perspectives, any questions about prison, about my release, any principles I had mentioned, go ahead and drop them in the comments. If you want to see me do a video and talk about a certain topic, drop it in the comments. I'll make sure I'll definitely respond. And if it's fire enough, man, I might even do a video about it, man. It's your boy, E.I. the King, and this is the Incarceration Podcast.